Hello and welcome to The Perspective. I'm your host Rafae Iqbal, and in today's show we'll be talking about the new tariffs imposed by the US President Donald Trump and their impacts on Pakistan as well as the global stage, how they're going to be affecting different countries. If you talk about Pakistan, there's a 29% tariff increase on Pakistani goods, citing Pakistan's 58% tariff on the US products. This news is severely going to impact Pakistan's textile sector in particular, the US being one of Pakistan's largest trade partners and the textile contributing to a significant portion of the exports Pakistan makes to the US. But it's a challenge, there's an opportunity within a challenge, as there's tariffs imposed on other countries that have bigger textile exports to the US as well, such as Bangladesh, Vietnam. The countries that face, if you talk about the global stage, that face a significant advantage are the Turkey and the Far Eastern countries, which face significantly lower tariffs as compared to the others. China, if you talk about it, has an additional 34% tariff on top of the previous 20%. The European Union has been slapped with a 20% tariff, and Canada and Mexico also face similar situations. There's been criticism by the European Union President and from the European countries as well with regards to the tariffs imposed. The same has also been seen from China's side, which has vowed reciprocal tariffs on the US products. We talk about the global stage and how the new tariffs are going to impact Pakistan in particular. The Finance Minister Mohammad Aurangzeb recently in a press conference, he talked about how there's going to be a delegation going to the US to negotiate on these tariffs and see what the way forward can be, giving impetus to how there could be an opportunity within a crisis as well, as he also stated. In the studios, we've been joined by Dr. Manzoor Ahmad, former ambassador to the World Trade Organization, and on Skype we have been joined by Jauhar Saleem, former Foreign Secretary and President of IRS. I'd like to thank you all for your time and being part of the conversation. Starting off from Dr. Manzoor, a very significant shift that we've seen in the policy of the US with regards to tariffs as vowed by the US President, and how Pakistani economists are saying it's going to affect the textile sector very significantly. What would you say about that, the impacts it is going to have on Pakistani economy?
Yes, indeed. First, because Pakistan is too much dependent on textiles. I mean, 60% of our total exports is textiles, and to the United States, it's almost over 90%. So we are really concerned because of too much high dependence on one sector. But on the other hand, as you already explained, this is not just Pakistan. They have imposed, I mean, if we look at our competitors like Bangladesh, like Vietnam, like Cambodia, like others, it's even higher than us. Perhaps the only competing countries where it is a little bit lower is Turkey, and India is about the same as Pakistan. So yes, Pakistan is a bad situation, but it's happening to the rest of the world as well. So what's happened is that they put a 10% across the board for all countries. Okay, and then on top of that, in Pakistan it's another 25%, 29%. But then if you look at all these countries that I mentioned, it's in 40s, 46, 48, 49, that kind of. I can go on, but maybe I'll leave it for your next question.
Definitely, I'd like to include Mr. Jauhar Saleem in the conversation as well with regards to his views on how the US being one of Pakistan's largest trade partners, especially with regards to the textile sector. What do you say the impacts it is going to have on the Pakistani economy, especially when we see so much work being done for economic uplift, and how the Prime Minister also announced a significant reduction in the electricity prices in the country as well?
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to recall that before Trump took over, I had predicted that his presidency would bring new challenges for Pakistan. And one of the challenges that I had pointed out was about this tariff plan that he had. Trump having stated that tariff is the most beautiful word in English for him, and then subsequently he said one of the most beautiful words. So he was going to be big on tariffs, and that is what has happened exactly. Now, what we see, as Dr. Saab has explained, we have 29% tariffs now will be levied on Pakistan's exports to the US. And Pakistan Pakistan's, for us, the US is really important. Why is that? Because it's the biggest exporting partner that we have. In terms of our biggest trade partners, US is our biggest importer, while China is the biggest exporter to Pakistan in terms of our bilateral trade with these countries. And we have a hefty surplus, trade surplus with the US. Now that could be impacted. But again, our competitors, it's true that there have been sort of, like some of them are actually facing higher tariffs than Pakistan, notably China, Cambodia, Vietnam. But India has slightly lower, 3% lower. Turkey is lower. But I would also say that here we have to take into account the countries such as UAE and Singapore. Now, these are countries which are trading countries. So they have got a much better tariff regime from the US. And what happens is that these countries do not really produce textiles or the exports because again, although predominantly we export textiles to the US, but we do also export sports goods, surgical instruments, food products, and then there's a range of products, although they are smaller in terms of volume or in dollar terms. So these countries, the trading countries, will now try to get the broadest segment of the market. There is the issue of rules of origin there, but there's always ways to bypass that through some value addition. For instance, there's a country such as Bahrain, which has a free trade agreement with the US, and a lot of products that they export to the US have been ambassador there. I noticed were basically they first import from other countries, then they add some value, and then they export to the US. So those trading countries or trading economies would benefit quite a bit because they've got more favorable terms. So this creates new challenges for us. And as the finance minister has stated that they plan to take a delegation to the US, before they have constituted some committees, a steering committee and a working level committee. One is headed by the finance minister himself. The other one is headed by the Secretary of Commerce. So they'll come up with their recommendations. They've had meetings with the Prime Minister as well. And then when they go to the US, because one of the things which is also in the air is that the US plans to first, of course, first they're basically threatening the countries with these tariffs, and then they might negotiate with countries individually. So if that happens, then Pakistan...
That's a different segment that I'll come towards as well. But when we talk about, and before we move towards that, I'd like to move on to the topic of how it's going to affect the global powers as well, such as China talking about how they're going to impose reciprocal tariffs and its effects on the global trade. Mr. Jauhar? Well, Mr. Jauhar, I was, yeah.
Yeah, can you repeat the question, please? Because I lost you for a second.
Yeah, I was asking, since we're talking about, we'll move towards how it is, whether a negotiating tool or a shift in the policy. But before that, I'd like to come towards how it is going to affect the global trade, such as China vowing reciprocal tariffs on the US.
Yeah, I think that's a very good question, because that is what is the concern and fear amongst economists in a lot of countries. Some of the leading economists have already expressed their concerns, because this has begun a trade war, a global trade war. And what we see from history is that in previous occasions, wherever there have been trade wars, the result has not really been good. For example, just before the Great Depression, there were trade wars. There was a big global trade war in a way, again, which was started by America and Europe against each other. And then, of course, because they had the colonial empires, everybody else got affected. Even before that, before the First World War, there was a global trade war as well, in terms of at least between the leading powers at the time. So the fact is that whenever these trade wars have been initiated, the result has not been good. Sometimes they have led to wars, but in other occasions also, what they have led to is sometimes recessions, sometimes depressions, and in some ways it has been mutually, if not destructive, at least it has been mutually malignant. So a lot of economists believe that this might plunge the globe into a recession. We already see some signs in terms of the stock market collapse that has happened in the US, in other countries. The oil prices have fallen sort of like steeply as well. Although the fall in oil price actually helps Pakistan because we are net importers. In fact, we are big importers of oil in terms of our economic size. But in all, I would say that this trade war that has been initiated by President Trump, it is pregnant with some grave consequences.
Definitely, definitely. And on that, I'd like to include comments from Dr. Manzoor Ahmad as well. So, when we talk about the global implications and how what we're seeing, the repercussions, such as China also vowing reciprocal tariffs on the US, the recessions and depressions, we saw the stock markets, how they were crashing, as Mr. Jauhar Saleem also mentioned. How do you see all the situation playing up in the global context?
Yes, as Ambassador Jauhar Saleem just mentioned, I mean, if we look at historical context, I mean, something comparable happened in 1930s when, U.S. imposed tariffs on about 20,000 products across the board, etc. But then there were serious consequences, not only for U.S. but for other countries as well. So if we look at that, and if we look at how stock exchanges are now reacting for the last 2-3 days, I mean, this big fall, trillions have been wiped off the trade fall. So all the economists are unanimous that this is going to be bad for everybody. US might end up in recession, so would many of other countries. So, the trade wars, never any winners. I mean, US did it in last time when President Trump came the first time. In 17-18, he put some tariffs on China, but it didn't work in favor of US. So, they never really work. I mean, we have our own problems with India, but it doesn't really work in anybody's interest.
Yes. And how do you see these other countries playing off with regards to the tariffs, imposing reciprocal tariffs and imposing, of course, the global trade? It is going to impact the smaller countries, the developing countries more. How do you see that's going to play? Do you see that more as a crisis or an opportunity for them?
Well, for the time being, it's a crisis, and we don't know how it will unfold. For the time being, it's just US versus the rest of the world. Whatever US is doing, other countries are putting, like China did, already put a 34% tariff on US exports. And the other countries, they're being careful. They don't want to target each other. So, it's them versus the rest of the world. But we can see it, it's not a good thing to happen, but I'm on these two committees that Ambassador Jauhar Saleem mentioned. I'm both steering committee as well as other committee. And we talk to these businessmen, etc. They see some silver lining as well. They see that, well, the biggest exporter to these countries is China, and maybe, they get some opportunity,
some room to
and also because relative to other countries, Pakistan has some tariff advantage. So and because we were for a while stuck at this low level, maybe this is an opportunity for us to look at our own policies and reform them.
Dr. Manzoor, that brings me to another question. President Trump came in with the slogan of Make America Great Again, and how he wants to revive America's industry, how he wants to create jobs domestically, and how he wants to create products that America imports domestically. But at the same time, we know the American industry has been quite dormant for some time. Do you see with this Make America Great policy, with the slogans and all, of course it brought him into power, but do you think the American society can revive their industry? It has the capacity to enable that labor, to enable those industries again and actually revive them and create that industry domestically?
Well, it might happen in some sectors, but I don't see them really overall. For example, they moved on from textile, clothing, etc. I don't think they want to go back. Like many of our people moved on from agriculture to manufacturing, gone to cities. I don't think really them going back. So one thing is that these tariffs are not going to help. They didn't help them previously. They didn't help them in 1930s. They didn't help them. So they have to find another way, because I don't think that's because you see, the minute you put all these tariffs on your industry, your industry is no longer competing with somebody else. So they become less efficient, etc. And that's been the experience of any country. Now, if you look at the global map, you will see that countries that have done very well are those which have free trade. Like US has become #1 economy, still is #1 economy, despite all the surge from China, is because it's the lowest tariffs. And on the other hand, if you look at countries like say Egypt, Pakistan, Nigeria, etc., which have very high tariffs, and they didn't really make it anywhere. All the time they're borrowing from IMF. So, the more you expose your industry to competition, the better you are in terms of, your economic welfare.
Definitely. Comments from Mr. Jauhar Saleem as well. So we heard how the Make America Great Again campaign, it did woo the American voters. They found it very well. But at the same time, do you think reviving the industry will be enough to cater the demands of the American markets?
Besides being a student of international relations, I'm a student of economics as well. So I'll make 3 or 4 key points here. Number one is the fact is that America has what is called in economics, we call it full employment. That is close to, like, it's never 100%, but it's very close to that. So the thing is that there's no excess capacity there in the US, which could be diverted to industrial capacity. That is number one. The second point is that America is now what we call an information-based society, because you see, America doesn't need to be to industrialize. That is for countries like Pakistan, with developing countries. Then they become industrialized societies. And after that, you become the information-based societies, the service economies, and then the information-based societies. Now, if you see, go back in history, we see a very interesting example. By 95, in the mid-90s, America felt threatened from Japan in economic terms. In fact, at one point, the difference between America and Japan's GDP was 7.5 is to 5.5. That was the low, the least difference they had. Japan was climbing so close. And then what happened in America? It's not that they went back to any industrialization, because Japanese were producing better cars, better electronics, better music system, better games, everything better. But what Americans did, they innovated. They moved to what we call the information technology. Companies like Microsoft, they were producing nothing, just softwares, and just Microsoft software sold more in terms of billions of dollars than any Japanese company could sell their products or cars or whatever. Similarly, Google and then Oracle and all these companies. So that is what catapulted America to becoming a much bigger economy, to the extent that now the difference between Japan and America's economy is roughly 1:6 times. And that has not happened because America started better cars or better electronics, or that we focus more on industrialization. Rather, it happened because America innovated. That is America's strength. America's biggest strength is America's universities. America's biggest strength is their research and the connection between the academia and the industry in America, which we see. And the ecosystem of startups and innovation, the encouragement for innovation, and their ability to attract the top talent in the world. And if instead of that, they go back to focusing on industrialization, I don't really see how that could make America great again. America, in my view, is already great. The difference between America and China, the second biggest economy of the world, in the last 4 or 5 years, has actually increased. At the lowest point, the difference had it was just a 7 trillion difference. Now it's almost $10 trillion. So America, by all accounts, is doing well by playing on its strengths. So instead of playing on its strengths, it starts to play on its weakness, which is the industrial capacity. Because the fact is that in America, because their per capita income is $80,000. Per capita income of $10,000 or $15,000. So I don't really think, from an economic standpoint, I don't really think it makes a lot of sense, this policy. And besides, it's going to be unpopular. The other countries are going to retaliate, and countries have started retaliating already. So I don't really see, and I think I would agree with most of the economists in America and other countries who are saying that this could be mutually maleficent rather than being beneficent.
Well, very well said. And of course, since a consensus has been drawn on how this policy is not going to give a big advantage to the US, Dr. Manzoor, I'd like to come towards another aspect. An actual policy shift or just a negotiating tool?
Yes, I agree. I mean, instead of actually going to war or threatening sanctions or something.
Yeah.
This is a big thing because already, if we have seen since the US imposed all these tariffs, almost all, whether it's developed or developing countries, it's Pakistan, anybody, they're running to US because US is the #1 economy still. It's the biggest importer in the world. So they're running that, this is going to maybe, okay, this is going to hurt American economy, but it's more going to hurt us. So what can we do to do this? So as a negotiating tool, it's a big, but normally if you're a #1 economy, then you don't threat countries like Bangladesh, like Pakistan, who have very little trade and all this thing. And many countries have recently emerged, they reduced their poverty like India did, China did, Vietnam did. So they are, this is one way through trade. And US, in a way, is still #1 economy. So the thing is, maybe the problem is that there is very upper class, some people, there's too much inequality. There's Elon Musk and kind of Mark Zuckerberg and some people, trillionaires.
Yes.
And then there's some people who feel left out. So it's the internal problem. They have to sort it out internally rather than taking up with the rest of the world.
Definitely. Mr. Jauhar Saleem, we heard what Dr. Manzoor had to say. What's your opinion on how, whether it could be an actual policy shift or, as we know, Donald Trump as a negotiator, as a businessman, it's just a negotiating tool to get to what he actually wants?
I think there are two things involved here. Number one, okay, Trump likes to do that. Is his style as a businessman, he's a deal maker, but what you do sometimes is you try to sort of, you carry some threats and then sort of bring the other party down to their basics in terms of their bottom line. So it's probably a negotiating tool as well. But at the same time, I do believe that, because we have to remember that Trump's core constituency in the US is what? That is basically the middle classes. A lot of them are industrial workers, or they are involved in agriculture. And these are the sectors which actually feel threatened by other countries. So he's also trying to please them. He's also trying to appease those. And he genuinely believes, perhaps, that America is getting a bad deal because, when he's individually citing the figures that with this country, that they have this much tariffs, for example, 50% tariffs on US products, and we have only 25% tariffs. He mentioned by name so many countries. So he actually feels as a businessman that America is getting the wrong end of the stick. And in his own way, by his own standards and wisdom, is trying to correct that. But the problem is that in economic terms, that doesn't really make a lot of sense, because America's strength is not its industry. America's strength, like I said, is its innovation, and which can earn much, much more than sort of, there are companies like Facebook and Google and Microsoft, and now with, with America and other countries being at the new technological revolution, that is the artificial intelligence. And that is where big money would be in future. I think America would be better off by focusing on more innovation, keep attracting more global talent, and by being the best in those emerging on the more sophisticated technologies, some of the defense technologies, in the space technology as well. America has regained its leadership and sort of is far ahead of other countries. So it's, in AI, there's a close competition with China, but still America is ahead. And many other industries, in IT in general, America is still the leader. So that is where they need to invest and they need to focus more, because, even if they sort of, it's not even hurting America by running deficits with all these countries. Why? Because 80% of the world's foreign exchange market is US dollar. And America has that advantage, which in economic terms we call seigniorage. That is, when America prints dollar, it's calculated that 70% of those dollars basically go out of the US, so they don't really create inflation in America. Now, this is a huge capacity that you enjoy, that you can literally print dollars without the fear of inflation. So America should use that leadership of that dominance of the financial sector, the global financial dispensation, and its leadership of the emerging technologies and innovation, and its ability to attract the best talent. And I think it will continue to do well. Starting trade wars like that, which would plunge the whole global economy into some sort of a crisis probably would not be to America's advantage in the longer term, I guess.
Definitely, that's what most of the economists are saying. Dr. Manzoor, of course, we've talked about at length that how this policy, the shift, this negotiating tool, it could affect and impact America even worse than how it's going to affect other countries. But at the same time, what options are left for countries like Pakistan in face of these new tariffs, as we're focused on increasing economic cooperation with our trade partners, as we're focused on increasing our exports and increasing revenue for our foreign exchange reserves as well?
Yes, the options are as the government is doing. First, as the finance minister said, we are sending some delegation, high-level delegation to U.S. to convince them that, if Pakistan's economy suffers, and there are a lot of things that we import from U.S. I mean, their agriculture exports, we are short of cotton, we import that, soybeans, iron and steel, some pharmaceuticals, etc. If our economy suffers, then their farmers are going to suffer. That's one thing. And the other thing is that, if the U.S. can sell us anything on competitive basis, we are willing to buy this. I think most countries are doing this. Okay, we have this trade deficit, we want to buy more, but you have to be more competitive, because if your cotton or whatever is 20% more expensive, obviously we have to buy something else. So Pakistan is doing this whatever to convince the U.S. administration that this will hurt us, but in the process it will hurt you, and also it will take some trade from your side to elsewhere. So I think whatever like other countries are doing, Pakistan is doing the same thing.
Definitely. Mr. Jauhar Saleem, your views as well on how countries like Pakistan that have US as one of the largest trade partners with regards to certain sectors such as textile, they can play well as with their efforts for economic revitalization, increasing their economic revenue, and how they place well within these tariffs.
One of the challenges that we have is that in terms of negotiating with the US, these tariffs, is that, our exports to the US, although they are pretty big for us, probably like 1/5, close to 1/5 of our total exports. But for the US, they're just 0.16% of their global imports. So it doesn't really, they don't really see us as a major negotiating partner in that way. And probably because, what I see is that whatever policy they adopt in terms of negotiation, it would not really vary too much from one country to another. So that would be a challenge. But on the other hand, as it has been already said, that some of our biggest competitors, for instance, China, Bangladesh, in particular, then Cambodia and Vietnam, because they are facing significantly higher tariffs than Pakistan. So that could be an opportunity for us to see how we could get some market share from there. Although on the challenges side, I had mentioned that India with 3% lower tariffs and 3% could become significant if you are competitive enough. Now the problem, sometimes what some countries do to offset new tariffs or higher tariffs is that they come up with a package of some subsidies or some incentives for their exporters. Now here, the issue could be because we are under an IMF program, so subsidies, giving any type of subsidies or coming up some incentives would be a little more difficult than it would have been otherwise. But like I said, overall, it is both a challenge and an opportunity, and it depends on us how we deal with that. I would just recall my last point on that is that I would recall that in the early 2000s, when MFA was being abolished, that is multi-fiber agreement, there were different projections and there was, in fact, optimistic projection, or even the less optimistic projection was that Pakistan would greatly benefit from the abolition of quotas. But in actual terms, what happened was that Pakistan was one of the countries which benefit least from that. In fact, our competitors benefited for most part. So we have to see that this time we do not really miss the bus again. And for that, a very well thought out, very well calibrated policy, sort of, and very sort of, dynamic and deft diplomacy would be required.
As we're moving towards the conclusion, there's another aspect that came to mind and I'd like to discuss with both of the great analysts that we have in the studio and on Skype. So when we talk about Dr. Manzoor, when we talk about how it's going to affect the global trade, when we talk about regional situation, we know Pakistan conducted the SEO conference and how it also focused on economic cooperation within the regional stakeholders. We know a lot of work is also being done for regional connectivity with the Central Asian states, how there's new silk routes being developed within Pakistan, and how the Gwadar port is now operational. In light of the tariffs that we see from the US and how it's bringing a change in the global trade, do you think this regional connectivity and the regional situation could also gain more impetus, and the connectivity, so it's a Belt and Road Initiative by China, how this connectivity could gain more impetus with regards to how the regional and global trade is forming now?
Well, I think that regional connectivity can play a big role. Unfortunately, it hasn't done so far because we don't trade with anyone in the region. And for example, now there are more, very high tariffs on China, say 54 plus 34 plus already 54. So that's quite high. And already industry was moving out of China, but they were mostly moving to, say, Cambodia, Vietnam, etc. And now, even because there are high tariffs on Vietnam, Cambodia, etc., so there's an opportunity to move them here. But we have to make some effort because we have to open up our economy to this investment. Because if somebody looks at how should we invest in Pakistan, they will look at how much duty we'll have to pay for our machinery that we move to Pakistan. If it's very high and there's another country, they think that, okay, bring your machinery, it's duty free, we'll give you electricity free, etc. Then they will go there. Fortunately, Pakistan has taken a big step recently. One of the big complaints against Pakistan was that the energy costs are very high. And just 2 days ago, the Prime Minister really reduced it. I think the unit cost is now 7 point some, rupees 7 point something. This is a big reduction. So this big complaint has already been settled. There are some other minor things which they can do, but that should attract some investment.
Definitely. A silver lining within crisis. Mr. Jauhar, what's your view? Of course, when we talk about how the regional situation could play out with the global trade changing now.
Yeah, just a small correction here. Doc said that 7.62 is not the new tariff, it's just a reduction in the tariff. So that the industrial tariff would still be, I think it's over 40 rupees per unit still. But this would be a reduction. So probably now it will be less than that. But our electricity sort of cost is still much higher than our competitors. So, but this is a good trend. I think this is a good initiative, but we have to go probably a bit sort of, we have to continue on that path. That is one. The second thing is that, it's not just our trade with the US. There are bulk of our exports are to the US, or to North America and the European Union market. And I've been saying that we might see some challenges in the European Union as well in the coming days. And that I've been ambassador to Germany and I've been ambassador to Italy. And when I was there, those were good times in the sense that we were able to significantly raise our exports there. And we had the advantage of GSP Plus. But the GSP Plus may also come under some pressure. So I think we have to evolve a policy, a more holistic policy in terms of which could deal not just with the US, the tariffs the US is levying, the additional tariffs, but also in terms of how to protect and our market share and increase our market share in the European Union, because there what is happening is the role of European Parliament is being enhanced in terms of the the review and continuity of the GSP plus regime, wherever it has been, the facility has been given to developing countries. So the Parliament would have a bigger say on that. And within the European Parliament, there are multiple shades of opinion and so there'll be more challenges. So our policy needs to be, first of all, to be more competitive, because unless we compete with, or we are able to compete, in terms of global standards, particularly with our competitors. Then, secondly, we need to diversify our exports. Thirdly, you mentioned the regional connectivity and the regional markets. I think that is very important because South Asia is still one of the least integrated regions of the world, with just 5% of intra-regional trade. In terms of Central Asia, our trade is still, very limited. It's perhaps $500 million. Now, with all the Central Asian countries, if I could recall the figure correctly, and that is very incommensurate with the actual potential. So I think we have to come up with a holistic policy in terms of being more competitive, first of all. Then in terms of going up the value chain, that is very important because most of our exports are still low value added exports. You can't really go far with that. So we need to, and we have the capacity for that. We have cheap labor, but we also have we are one of the biggest English-speaking countries in the world, at least as a second language, and we have we have a country with a very young population. We need to really work on imparting skills, some vocational training, and and more investment, more capital formation in terms of modernizing our industries. So the policy and its implementation has to be really very deft and very forward-looking.
Well, a very pragmatic approach that both of the analysts that we have highlighted, and that brings us to the conclusion as well of the new tariffs imposed by the US President and its impacts on the global and domestic front with regards to Pakistan, and how a silver lining could be found within this situation for Pakistan as well, as the government focuses on economic revitalization and uplift. I'd like to thank both of the gentlemen that have joined us for the conversation, Dr. Manzoor Ahmad, former ambassador to the World Trade Organization, and Mr. Jauhar Saleem, former ambassador and president of the IRS. Thank you both for your time, and that brings us to the wrap up for The Perspective. See you all same time next week. Till then, take care.